Today I'd just like to take you quickly through some ideas of how to engage with the reading task. The reading task is your first question in your HSC in the common module. And when you think about this particular question, it's of as much importance as any of your other questions. So it's 20 marks, it's worth 20% of your HSC. And having marked this at the HSC, there's the potential to get 20 out of 20 markers will be pretty positive. This is the start point, okay, for everyone in English. So they are trying to be marking in a very positive manner. You've got 10 minutes reading time in this paper. Obviously, you'll also want to spend a little bit of time reading the essay question, but essentially most of your time should be spent reading the stimulus and the text that they provide you. When you think about it, my suggestion to you would be to start with this. Now, some of you would start with the second question because you need to remember your quotes. But the only reason I would suggest to start with this is you're going to read the text, and then if you can answer straight away, what you've read is fresh in your mind. But that's a personal choice. Based on the fact that the paper's an hour and a half, you've got about 45 minutes to complete each of these questions. So you've got to sort of think to yourself that you don't want to be spending more than 45 minutes. But I in fact think that you could probably finish this section in about 40 minutes. And that's if you stick to 2 minutes per mark for each question. So if the first question was worth 3 marks, my suggestion would be for you to aim to finish that in 6 minutes. If it's worth 5 marks, spend 10 minutes, and so on. So essentially a bit of simple maths. If you look at the question, mark value and times it by 2, that would give you a pretty good guide of how long to spend on that question. All right, to ensure success, you need to find 4 different things in each of these texts. So the first one, you need to find some ideas about human experiences, which I'll go through in a moment. You need to find quotes and evidence that prove the ideas of that human experience, okay? And you're going to see that in techniques as well. Always your connection or your link back is, what does it say about human experiences? So you see in 3 as well, you're going to identify techniques that are used by the composer. And again, you're going to relate those ideas to human experiences. And the 4th one you're going to want to look at is the tone of the text, and I'll explain to you why that's important in a moment. So the first one, when you look at human experiences, you need to go back to the rubric. Now, I shared with you a YouTube clip where all of you will see me go through the rubric and identify some important aspects of the rubric. Now, this is where you get your ideas about human experiences. So this is a pretty simple one. They're common to a majority of people. We know in the rubric they've got ideas like anomalies, inconsistencies, and paradoxes. And an example of one of those paradoxes is to grow as a person, you need to regress. Okay, so you need to maybe have difficult human experiences to grow and understand what you value. Now, when you think about that, you've also studied some texts like Billy Elliot or 1984, where you've got ideas about what human experiences are through those texts. So use what you've studied to create these ideas as well. There's a lot of different ideas, but obviously you've got to read the stimulus and read the text in the reading task to understand what that text says about human experiences. But you want to have some preparation around that so that you've got some basic ideas that you can implement. The second thing is that you need to find this evidence that is going to prove your ideas about human experiences. Now, I make a point here that I will never make in any other section, but for this one, find the most obvious examples that relate to human experiences. So you're not looking to be clever here, you're looking to be accurate and to be able to answer the question that you're asked. So you're not looking for something obscure, find the most obvious quote that proves what you want to say. Now, the second dot point, again, I'll reiterate, is it's got to relate to an idea of human experience, because that's the module that we are studying. So you might find a quote that says, human experiences were difficult. And you would use that quote, even though it's really, really obvious, because that quote is going to allow you to talk about the difficulty of human experiences. Okay, so don't try and be clever here, just try and look for evidence that proves your idea about human experience. Then you're going to want to find some techniques, because very often in this question, the questions require you to identify techniques and comment on them. Now, anytime you see a question in this section that has the word how, you are going to need to refer to ideas of techniques that are used by the composer. Now, I've given you a short sort of idea of some different techniques that you may be able to use. So for a visual text, there will always be a focal point or a salient image. So a focal point is just the first thing that catches your eye, and a salient image would be a dominant image within the text if it's visual. Color, the HSC will definitely spend the money to actually print your paper in color. So it would be nice of you to comment on the effect of color. Now, I could go deeper into that and sort of go blue's a calming color, red's a passionate color. So you need to make some comments around the effect of color on the meaning of the text. Vector lines are an easy one. They sort of direct your eye around the visual image and they create a reading path. Now, there might also be things like superimposed images that are more technical, but these are ones that are more than likely going to be in every visual text that you see. If you get a piece of poetry to analyze, then look for those obvious sort of poetic techniques like metaphor, hyperbole, simile, alliteration, onomatopoeia, repetition, the ones that you probably learned in year 7. If you feel more advanced, then you can find things like irony, things like juxtaposition or paradox, then go for your life, but find the ones that you know. So repetition's a good one. If you can find something that's repeated, then it's going to be easy to make comment on it and say the use of repetition emphasizes the idea. So look for the ones that you feel most comfortable with. In different print texts, and like I said, you might get fiction or non-fiction, truncated language, so like really short sentences, accumulation, a listing of ideas, repetition, again, a really obvious one, hyperbole, exaggerations, juxtaposition, a contrast between two ideas, are more than likely going to be there somewhere. So again, we're not looking for these really technical aspects of the writing. We're just trying to identify the way that the composer creates their ideas. Now, the last point's really important. If you don't know the name of the technique, don't worry about it. Just write down what it is, describe it, and what the effect is. If you write about the effect in a technique, about what the composer's done, you get marks. Okay, so the effect is more important even than the identification of the correct word. So only when you get stuck, just sort of say, this is what I'm seeing, and this is the effect of it. Okay, if you can use the language like truncation or accumulation or hyperbole, that's even better. But if you can't, at least describe what you are seeing and then explain the effect of it. The last one is about the tone of the text, and that's just going to help you understand what the text is about. There's been a few texts in the HSC that students have just totally misinterpreted because they haven't understood what the tone was, particularly with things like sarcasm, okay, where the author or composer is actually not saying exactly what they mean, okay? And even you would have noticed with things like paradox and irony, they people aren't actually being explicitly clear in the way that they write. So, to help you understand the meaning of the text, the first thing I would start with in tone is the text positive or negative about what they're writing about or what the visual text is about? Now, that makes it easier straight away to sort of understand what the text is actually meaning. The second one deeper is it sarcastic? Is it humorous? Is it aggressive? Is it persuasive? These questions will allow you to see, yeah, what I'm reading says this, but what it means is a different thing. Now, those sort of metaphorical or deeper meanings will allow you to understand the text. If you don't know the tone, if you just totally don't get it, you're like, I don't really understand what this is all about at all, just start to look at the language, which is what I call a lexical chain, which is just a chain of words that will give you an indication. Now, if the words are like, radiant, colorful, bright, happy, joyous, that lexical chain will show you that the text is positive. If all of the words are like morose, sad, depressing, then you're going to know it's fairly negative. So the language, even if you don't understand the text at all, those specific words that you do understand will help you get some sort of sense of what the text is about. So when we're looking at these rules, I've gone through these already. The mark value is essential. What I suggest that you do is use a quote or evidence per mark. So if it's worth 2 marks, use 2 quotes and evidence. If it's worth 6, use 6. Now, the reason I say this, that's probably overkill to be honest. But if you do it, you're going to get marks, okay? It's going to be really easy to get marks. In your first sentence, always address the question. And I mean like if you're in year 5 and year 6 when you had to write full sentences in this response, like you're going to be quite obvious. And again, this is something I would suggest for this question and for no other question in the HSC. In the second sentence, give some evidence to support your answer. So look at the text and start to say, and so this is where the actual answer, this is the evidence I have for this answer. And then in the third sentence, even if it doesn't ask for it, always explain the technique and the effect it has on meaning and relate it to human experiences or the question that you're being asked. Be very explicit in the way that you write this particular answer. The only other suggestion I would make to you is this, and this is, I think, the most essential thing I learned from marking this question. A lot of students for a 3-mark question will write a big block of writing. And when you're marking, and obviously, you're marking a lot of papers at the HSC, and you're reading it, it just all blends into itself because it's just one block of writing. If it's worth 3 marks, my suggestion to you is to write a section that you think you get a mark for, leave a line, write another section, leave a line, write another section. So if I go to mark a question that's worth 3 marks and I see 3 different sections of writing, I'm pretty sure that this kid's going to get 3. So you're really helping me as a marker make it obvious that you have 3 ideas that I can sort of clearly see. So don't be afraid to use that. For the questions that are worth more marks, it's even advisable to have like a mini essay where you write a really short introduction, and it might be, when I say short, like a sentence or two, then your evidence in a couple of different paragraphs, 2 or 3, depending on the mark value, and then a 1-sentence conclusion. That way it makes it really obvious that you're engaging with the question and that you've got evidence to support that question. So there's a couple of ideas with the writing. So let's have a look at how we write this evidence, and let's look at a text, a visual text, and then let's look at an answer so that we can model off this to see how we get 1 mark, okay, in this paper. So the first thing that I want to establish is what's the human experience and what does the question require. Then I need quote or evidence to prove it. Then I need a technique, an effect word. Now an effect word would be illustrates, highlights, shows, conveys. Now I want to have a heap of those words because I'm going to need to use them a lot because I always want to explain the effect of the technique. Then after the effect word, I'm going to talk about what that technique does, how it shapes meaning, and how it engages with the question that I've been asked. And then, as you can see in the black writing, it's going to go back to how it relates to human experiences or the question. Now, when I write this model, sort of section, I'm going to mirror those colors. So the red is going to be an idea of human experiences. The evidence is going to be in blue, technique in green, effect in pink, discussion of that effect in red, and then the link back to sort of the question or human experiences in black. So watch for that modeling when you see it. This is the text that I want us to look at. Okay, so let's go back through what we said at the start. Number 1, what does this say about human experiences? So you've got a lot of people taking a photo of the sun either rising or setting. I'm going to say it's probably setting. Now, when you look at this particular image, okay, what is the human experience? Number 1, it's a shared and collective experience. There's lots of people experiencing it together. Then the question is, are they really experiencing it, or are they just, sort of taking a photo of it? So maybe it's like a disingenuous human experience. The paradox is they're experiencing a beautiful sunset or sunrise, but they're not actually experiencing it because they're looking at it through their phone to take a photo. So can you see, that there's some ideas about human experiences? Number 2, I said get some evidence. Well, the evidence is this. I've got an image of the sunset or sunrise in the backdrop, and then in the front, I've got all these people holding their phones and taking photos of it. And so I've got this collective human experience of all these people holding the phones, and I've got the real thing. There's a juxtaposition or a contrast between those two things. So that's my evidence, okay? Now, in a print text, it would obviously be words, but in this one, it's visuals. Then number 3 was identify techniques. So the technique I would identify first is I go, okay, so the color. The color is really bright and really warm, showing that it could be a very positive human experience. Then that color is contrasted to the blacks of the screen, which is a little bit more negative because it's like bordering this beautiful image and sort of capturing and controlling it. All right, so I'm seeing that as a negative. Some people might see that as a positive, but I would say the color contrast of the warmth to the dark is sort of showing that they're not having this genuine human experience. Another technique I could use is the vector lines. So I might be looking at the lines of the phone, sort of directing me. They would be the focal point. The focal point would be, I think you can see this where I think it's this photo, this camera at the bottom, and then those vector lines lead me up to here, and then these vector lines lead me here, and then see how all the screens sort of keep leading me up to see the actual sunset and the sunrise, okay, one or the other. So can you see how the vector lines lead me to see that at the first stage I see that they're taking a photo, the second one I see that there's actually a beautiful image that people should be taking in. So I've got color, I've got a focal point, and I've got vector lines, okay, that I can use as a technique. Now, number 4, the tone of the text. Is this positive? Now, some people would say, yeah, it's positive because they're capturing a really beautiful scene. I'm seeing it as a negative because I'm looking at all of these people who aren't really experiencing the moment, that they're trying to, sort of live through it in a photo. And then I can stretch this further. The tone to me is like we're too obsessed with our phones and we're always using them because we want to sort of capture, sort of moments that we can post on our social media, but we're not really experiencing the moment. So that's how I see the text. Now, it doesn't matter what question I'm asked now. I know what the text says. I've got evidence from the text. I've got techniques that are used, and I understand the tone of the text, or I've got my own impression of the tone of the text. So let's look at an answer now. So the first one, let's just go back 2 slides, was about the idea of human experience. So the cartoon examines how appreciating a sunset is a common human experience. All right, so I've said what the human experience is. It's common. My quote to prove it: the collection of phones mirroring the image of the sunset shows our obsession with capturing the moment. Okay, so now I've got this quote and I've described it. That's my evidence. Then I've got a technique, the vector lines. Okay, so remember I said to you about these lines of the phone leading up to the actual sunset. Okay, then I've got that word illustrate, which is an effect word. And then I've got in the red a discussion of the technique, which is that all the phones are pointed towards the sunset. Okay, then I've got another effect word, establishing, and this is a connection back to human experiences or the question. They are sharing a human experience of taking a photo rather than savoring the moment. That's quite a compact, quite a tight sort of example that I'm talking about, and that would be worth a mark. If it was a 3-mark question, I could then go on and sort of say other things, but you see the structure. I've got the human experience, I've got the quote or evidence, I've got the technique, an effect word, an explanation of that effect, another effect word, and a connection back to human experiences. Obviously, you guys will have questions that you'll want to link back to, but that gives you a really great example of how to engage with this sort of section of the HSC. So I hope that's been helpful. And if you have any questions of your teachers before you make an attempt on that paper, please do that. But I think that this could be a really good task or a good question for you guys to be able to get some really high marks. All the best with it.